It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Jan Wolfe, and we're going to be talking about her brand new book, Was the Time of Prayer. Jan, it's wonderful to meet you for the first time. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. It's wonderful to meet you too, Shaun. Been praying for your family. It's wonderful to finally connect with you.
Yes, well, we definitely appreciate those prayers, and same to you. It's always nice to put a face with a name. Sometimes, depending on the project, these podcast interviews are the only time I get to meet the author and talk to them face to face via Zoom. So it's wonderful to meet you as well. I know you're going to be brand new to the majority of my audience, so we're going to kick this off the same place we kick off most interviews, and that's by having you share a bit of the Jan Wolfe origin story. For everybody meeting you for the first time, tell us a few things we should know about you.
I am a retired teacher. I taught elementary school for 22 years and have a passion for children. I've been Christian, accepted Christ into my life. Oh, wow. 58 years ago, something like that. And somehow this all came about when I had my granddaughter in mind, and God just gave me these words. So here we go. It's been a great journey.
Well, thanks for giving us that elevator pitch version of the origin story. It's always nice to get a little bit of a background on the author, just to kind of have a sense of the why and who they are. It helps us to better understand the message that we're going to encounter in the book. I'd love to hear just a little bit more, pulling that thread of story behind the book, idea for the book. We're going to get into some of the meat of the themes, but was there a certain day that this idea just popped into your head? How did this project, like, what was the genesis? When did this get started for you?
It was totally crazy. COVID started in March 2020. There was a morning in April. I don't remember the date. I'm sure I've written down. I was having my devotional time, and this story popped into my head. And in 10 minutes, I had this little story written down that I thought was the entirety of the story, a picture book, but it would have to be published right now because COVID is here right now and it won't last very long. I had my granddaughter, Abby, in mind because she lives further away from us, so we couldn't visit her. And so I was just like knowing how she was feeling, but it was just like God gave me the words and it all rhymed. And wow. And I thought, I have to get this published in a hurry. And then COVID changed. And so I knew that 10-minute that I thought was going to be the entirety of the picture book was more like the outline of the book. And what I had at the end there wasn't really the end. So I added a chapter of what was going on at that time in our world. But then everything changed. And so I added another chapter and put the end on that one. And that's just how it kept happening. And it would be like 2 months. I didn't write anything. I didn't know where the book was going. I didn't know what to do. And I just prayed, God, when you're ready, you just show me what to do. And that's how each one happened. I have a granddaughter who goes to Messiah College, and it was her first year. And every time I would write anything, I would send it to her and say, what do you think? And she would give me her input back. So it was kind of like we were doing that together. But truly, it was God giving me these words. When the whole book was written in its entirety for real, and I looked back and reread the book, I was amazed at what God did. Like, it was like I was seeing some of it for the first time. Like, there was a problem and a solution. Exactly what you need in a story. There was clearly Abby in that story. There was, it was like God was leading. He had this wonderful character. It was just like unbelievable, really, for me to even, I couldn't believe what all he had done in there. It rhymed, so that would get, somebody's attention. Maybe they'd start reading the book. It was something that everybody in the whole world could relate to because, of what we all went through together. It related to scary feelings for a little girl, and then how she had peace and didn't feel quite so scared. And it had silliness in there to keep them interested, but it had tragedy because there was tragedy, and this was all a real story. And it just amazed me that God put all that in.
Yeah, that is often the case when God breathes on something. When we look back on it, we're like, gosh, did I even write this, or where did this come from? It had to be the Holy Spirit moving my fingers on the keyboard, which I assume most of us write on a laptop or something these days. I have a few friends who like to start writing things down on paper, but I prefer the digital myself. Let's talk a little bit about characters in the book. The book focuses on a family who is, dealing with all the ins and outs of the lockdowns and just difficulties of things happening in their own family and, friends and, extended family. Tell us a little bit about some of the people we're going to meet in the story.
Okay, so I based it on Abby, my granddaughter, who was 11 at the time, or almost 11. And so the little girl she doesn't have a name in the book, but she's an 11-year-old girl. And really based it on their family. Her dad is so silly. So that had to be a part of it. And they were praying. When COVID started, it was like I just felt like God was saying, you're busy, but you're busy with all the wrong things. I'm forcing you to slow down, to take time with me and with your family. And so I shared that with my family, and we all picked up on our prayer life. And so I knew that they were praying more, and I knew that they were further away, not far away. They live about an hour away from us, but still far enough that when it was in lockdown, we weren't seeing them. And I knew that Abby was at that age where she was really missing her friends. They live in a rural area, and she had some best friends, and she was heartbroken. And so that was how the story got started with that. So then I chose another granddaughter to kind of be the part of the older sister, because that part had to be put in there. It was uh, it was so divided as we were all going through this lockdown that younger children could start to go to school earlier, but the older children had to stay home and learn online and the things they went through. So I chose an older grandchild, even though not in that same mother-father relationship, just to pull that part of the story in.
Well, one of the things I noted that I really liked about the book is you show prayer as kind of just a normal rhythm of this family's life. Throughout the book, there are various people praying, and for some kids, they don't ever see their mom or dad pray, or it's not something they were ever, it's not happening at the dinner table or anything. And so, talk to us a little bit about, and you may say, hey, it was just how God directed me to write the book, but it seemed very intentional that you're weaving different people praying throughout as the story's unfolding.
Well, I wanted it to be that she was calm because she was so fearful. And God led me to her dad. I mean, I knew he was praying anyway, but I made him be praying aloud. And I don't know if that's what he would generally do or not, but I wanted her to hear and be calm. And I wanted it to be as she was getting into bed so she could feel restful at night. And so that's how, like I originally said, the beginning of the story that I thought was the whole story was that she was calmed. But then as we added, I say we because God really worked it. As we added the next chapter, it just kept growing into she felt calm and she started to pray. And her dad continued to pray and keep her calm and give her ideas through the prayers. And he was trying to bless people, but she was getting so blessed by things herself that she couldn't even understand that. And she started reading her Bible, and it just went from there. But we truly did have my sister, so it was Abby's aunt, did have COVID, did go to the hospital, had COVID pneumonia. Very scary for us because so many people went to the hospital and then never came home. And so we did put a prayer vigil together, and we knew that someone was praying every hour. And so I pulled on that because that was such a powerful thing for our family that we felt comforted by it, knowing that every hour someone was praying. We were talking on the phone. Well, can you take this time? We were texting each other, and it was so comforting to us that it had to be a part of the book to be comforting to the little girl and to the reader, to everyone, so it could touch their lives in that way too.
And this is maybe not quite midway through the story, but we do reach a point where the main character feels empowered to make a difference. She is making cards for her grandmother. She's making cards for other people to bless them and encourage them. Talk to us a little bit about just kind of, I felt like the message it conveyed is, letting kids know that, hey, you're empowered to make a difference. Maybe you can't do some of the big things, so to speak, that need to be done. But you can do things with what you have and what you're capable of doing that are going to bless people just as much as the quote unquote big things that the adults are doing.
Yes, well, that was really God. It was when her dad said in the prayer, help us bring to mind the people who need help and show us what we can do. And then it was that her cousin sent her a letter and it made her feel better. She knew that she could write letters. Then her grandmother came to the yard and brought some things for them. And she felt like, I need to send my grandmother a card. And then she just got on that silliness roll with her dad of toilet paper and the card and, that kind of thing. That was all God. I did not intentionally do any of that. Seriously. That's just how it went. That's how it worked.
Well, another theme we see is, people are intentionally going after prayer and intercession for healing. That's happening in the book. And we get to a place where the main character, her best friend, her dad passes away. He was sick. Talk to us a little bit about that tension. On the one hand, healing power, people going forward in faith, trusting that people are going to be healed. But sometimes prayers aren't answered. Now, I realize you don't actually unpack that in the book, yet that's the kind of the two-part tension I see in the story.
Right. Exactly. Because prayer is so important, and Jesus can heal anybody at any time, especially when it's big. I see him, the bigger the prayer, the the more people will know that it was Jesus, then they won't just, shush it off. But there was in our family, in our extended family, one of my nieces had a friend whose dad did die, and it impacted all of us. And I thought that something like that needed to be in there because I wanted, and God really helped me with this. I wanted the little girl to experience tragedy so that we could show her how to get through it. And with her best friend and just crying off and on all night, and knowing that the friend just needed me, she just needed to talk, it was no bother, that's what friends are for. I cried with her. It doesn't really say that that the main character talked to her and helped her, but she was present and she cried with her and she allowed her to talk. And God just put that all in there. If there again, when I read back some of it, just last night, I read through the story again. And sometimes when I get to a part, I just get all teary. Like, I can't even believe that's in there. And that part is makes me teary. It's a tragic. It was a tragedy for them to go through and to walk through, but a beautiful way that God had them walk through.
And I really appreciate that part of the book in terms of the main character just being with her friend. Often people don't know what to do when somebody has experienced a loss and they're grieving. We have a tendency to want to be like, well, this happened to me, and here's how I can relate to your story, your experience. And more than anything, grieving people don't want to hear your story. They just want you to be with them and just empathize and literally just be quiet with them and sort of just be together. And so I felt like you really captured that. It wasn't so much what was said as the two girls had a sleepover in the story. It was they were together, they were crying together, and that was really what her friend needed at that time when she was processing her dad's death. And the reality of going after prayer for healing and contending in that way, even if people aren't healed on this side, so to speak, on the other side of the veil, once they enter into heaven, they're going to experience complete and total healing and restoration. I've through the course of the last several years, having interviewed so many people who've had near death experiences, one of the things people talk about is once they transition to the other side, so to speak, all of a sudden, as they're untethered from their sick physical body here on earth, they feel better. They feel more alive than they've ever been, and everything works. And it's not horrible and terrible, so to speak, like it was before. And so, that also is, I think we need to remember that, that is a comforting thing that as we're praying for healing, whether it's here or in heaven, it's healing all the same. And, and as a show who talks to lots of charismatic authors, and that's kind of the Destiny Image audience, I really feel like we need to do a better job with this theology of death and, what do we do with it? Because yes, we believe for healing, but when healing doesn't happen, it doesn't mean that we've failed. It doesn't mean that God has failed. Sometimes it's just time for somebody to come home to heaven, and that's something we should be just as happy about, as if they got healed here on the earth as well. So, something for us always to keep wrestling with. It's like trying to figure out, why do bad things happen to good people? It's a bit of a paradox that we're just going to have to wrestle with until we get to heaven as well. Let's talk next about the main character taking more of what I would say is a personal ownership in prayer. As the book progresses, your main character, she's going after it in prayer all on her own. So you show us how she is growing in prayer as the story progresses. Talk to us a little bit just about the importance of, on the one hand, you have parents and people showing examples of how to pray. It's always, as a dad, I'll say things are often more caught than taught. But just why was it important to show, like, she's empowered to pray on her own now? She doesn't just need to draft on the prayers of her parents or the big people in the story.
Right. Well, there again, that was God. As the story progressed and I kept adding chapters, the girl just kept getting stronger in her faith. And I don't honestly know how that happened. She started to pray and she correlated it with, it helps me sleep better than counting silly sheep. And, it just kept on going. She felt more comforted. Felt more comforted. She loved reading her Bible. I guess that God was just showing us that when you feel so comforted from hearing prayers, if you could just learn to pray for yourself, then you can feel that comfort all the time. And you don't need to rely on another person. You can just pray and feel comforted because God is always there with you. And I guess that's what he was showing us, because that's what I got out of it.
Well, and another theme I wrote down in my notes is just this idea of that it's possible, and not just for the main character who's a child, but for any of us to, whether we already are following the Lord, I feel like whether we're finding a real relationship with God for the first time in the midst of difficulty and tragedy, or, we are taken from lukewarm where the circumstances require us to go deeper with God to a level we've never experienced before. Just talk to us a little bit about that theme of being able to find a real relationship with God in the midst of difficulty, which your main character does. And then also in the latter part of the book, there's some prayers and an invitation really for, somebody to follow Jesus on their own. I love that. That's how the book wraps up. Just unpack that. I feel like it's a critical part of the book.
Well, their faith in their family did really grow. Our faith really grew in our family and in all our extended family through the prayer vigil, that just the extra prayers we were praying. And I actually spent the night when it says in the epilogue that her dad went to the hospital. He really did. And that's my son, one of my sons. And I actually spent the night with them so I could get Abby to school the next day. And I witnessed her mom coming in. Abby actually has a younger sister, not an older sister, and she has autism. And Abby's mom sat on the floor in Abby's room, had Abby's little sister sit on her lap, held her hands, looked straight into her face, and said, "Mommy's going to pray." And she bowed her head and said those exact words that I have in there for the beginning of her prayer, that she just said, "Dear God," and then she, "Thank you for today." She just started out slowly, thanking God for the beautiful day. Thank you that we could have our windows open and get fresh air. Thank you that the girls are feeling well enough to play. She started it out so simply and went into, thank you that Nima is here and can help Abby. Thank you that Daddy is getting better. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. One of the most beautiful prayers I've ever heard. And it touched me in a way that it just had to be in the book. And it had to show the growth that not only was Daddy praying, Mommy is praying. We're all thankful no matter what happens. We know Jesus. We have experienced him. And that just lent itself to, if you don't know him, here's what you do. And so she kind of goes over that. But then at the end of the book, she gets into it in full, because I didn't want it to be read over, skipped over, and not really taken seriously. Because if you want Jesus, here is all you need to do. And that has to be the way it ends. That has to be there so they know that they can have him all the time, and they know he can live in your heart, and they know all you have to do is say, "I'm sorry for my sins and accept you as my Lord. To my heart, come into my life. I want to live for you." It's so powerful. It had to be the way it ended. It had to be the way it went. I love it, the way that it has then developed, that we're hoping to have a link at the end that they can click onto for a free Bible, that they could check into, and then partnering with Becky DeBork, that she will have some prayers at the end and show parents, here's how you can pray with your child and continue this and progress from this point. Beautiful ways to end the story. Really, it never ends then for the reader, because this is just the beginning.
Right. It's definitely a starting point in the journey. And I appreciate that prayer example that you just shared, because I think in the midst of difficulty and grief, we can reach a point where we've prayed all the things, that we feel like we have to pray. And sometimes all you can do is just express your gratitude and be like, well, God, thank you for this and thank you for that. I feel like, especially when people are weary and they don't know what to do, the best thing we can do is express gratitude. And I feel like it helps to kind of shift our perspective a bit, even though some aspect of our life is difficult or awful, or it's not what we wanted at all, that we still have so much more to be thankful for. That while this one area is a difficulty, God is sustaining and holding up all these other areas, even in the midst of dire circumstances. So sometimes when you don't know what to pray, express gratitude and see how the Holy Spirit leads that prayer. I feel like it takes you someplace good that you couldn't have just gotten to without starting out with gratitude. In terms of readers impacts, kids, parents, grandparents, because we talked about this a bit before the interview. The funny thing about children's books is, they're geared towards kids, but it's adults who are going to buy the book. Often it's adults, whether it's parents, grandparents, they're going to be reading the books for the kids. So in terms of how you hope people are impacted, weigh in on that. And then also just in terms of what are some of the really good discussion opportunities you could see parents and grandparents pulling out of this story to have great conversations with the kids they influence?
Well, you're right. If the children only get those books if the adults buy them. Um, and even when they have an opportunity, like at a book fair at their school, unless they're going to a Christian school, books like this might not even be there, that they would see them on their own. So a couple of things. I feel like the title evolved. It wasn't the way we started, but what a catchy title for a Christian parent to see on a bookshelf. Who wouldn't want to pick it up? And then the way God led it with the rhyming and to like catch them into wanting to read it. And that all evolved. That was amazing. The part that I see is, though, that there could be a child who doesn't even attend church that gets their hands on the book or is given that maybe by a grandparent. And the parents and child don't even go to church. And she's not a Christian, or he. And this just really opens up the possibilities that they read this because they certainly can relate to it. We all went through this time of sadness and loneliness and sometimes depression together in our own home, uniquely, but every child had something they had to deal with going through this. And so here we are. If it's a child that doesn't know anything about God, now she at least knows. And there's even a note in the back, talk to an adult and see if they can take you to a Bible teaching church. And so even if they read it on their own and they take it to an adult and talk about it, or if a parent or grandparent or guardian is reading it aloud to them and they get to that point, maybe the light bulb will come on and, we really should go to church. We'd know a lot more about this. And there are a lot of pastors who could help us through this, that kind of thing, or even calling someone. But there would also be the Christian families. And sometimes you just don't know how to talk about anything. It's funny, when I was looking at getting this book published and I was going online and looking at different publishers, and some would say, look at the market, and is there a place for your book in the market? And what makes your book different? And so I started doing a little bit of investigating, and what I found was there are some adorable books that lead the reader to Jesus, maybe as a talking lamb or a puppet. There are some great books that are out there that are written for adults. Here's how you lead your child to Christ. But I didn't see anything where there was a girl talking to children her own age who just went through some of the things that she went through, that they went through them together. And here's what you do. And it just felt like, wow, this is powerful. And like I said, God did it. And as I look back, I think, wow, he did that. It wasn't until the book was written and I was looking at these things online that I thought, wow, God, you were so amazing. You even handled that. You took care of that and that. It's so amazing to me. It wasn't me. It was all him. Totally.
Well, I can say as a dad of 10 kids who's read more children's books than I'll ever be able to count, there are so many key kind of theological worldview topics that if you're willing to be intentional and take the time, I think you could have a lot of really great kind of foundational discussions with your children. Whether it's talking about prayer or talking about, why do people get sick sometimes? God answering prayer sometimes. What we want with the prayers we pray, they aren't answered. How do we wrestle with that? I just feel like you could have a lot of like real foundational discussions with your kids, and kind of as you implied, the characters are extremely relatable. I think children are going to be able to see themselves, see their family in the story, and so and in any kind of writing, that's really what's important, is for the reader to be able to somehow kind of see, maybe a little bit, kind of write themselves into the story. And I think you definitely accomplish that with this book. And then also, just kind of a final theme, just that going through this book, I think, is going to allow kids to process and kind of feel, wrestle with, come to terms with some of the angst they still feel. We all experienced trauma and tragedy throughout the whole COVID timeframe, and I think a lot of people have never really gotten to process that. They just tried to move forward with life as best they can. But I think it'll be powerful for children, in the context with an adult, whether it's a parent, grandparent, whatever, to acknowledge that, and that was difficult, and there were really awful things that happened, and just to be able to process and talk it through, and maybe being able to put to rest maybe some of the anxiety. I'm sure as kids will listen to the news now, as people talk about, oh my gosh, is it going to come back? What are we going to do? That's all anxiety inducing and fear inducing. And so, it's a very timely time, I guess we might say, for this book to be hitting the market. In terms of picking up a copy of the book, destinyimage.com would be a great place. This is the latest addition to our Destiny Image Kids line, and then it'll be available through major retailers as well. Probably the easiest one for most of you watching or listening to this, you can head over to Amazon, and that would be another great place to pick up your own copy of the book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Jan Wolfe. Once again, our book today was "'Twas the Time of Prayer." And Jan, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's truly been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you, Shaun. It's been an honor and pleasure to meet you and be on your show. Thank you so much.